Yeah, recording has been started.
Thank you.
Hey Gokula, thank you so much. Thanks for making your time today on a Saturday to join us. And it's our immense pleasure to have you here. He's a Microsoft MVP in data platform. Power BI is one of the leading AI tool, as we all know, and it's essential to know about the need for data flows to bring in data to Power BI, right, to get the insights of it. And he's here to share us that. And stage is yours. Thanks, Gokula.
Thanks so much, Geeta uh, and Jiva. Uh, Welcome, everyone. My name is Gogula. Today I'm going to talk about the need for an implementation of Power BI data flows. Uh, I, Geeta already gave a little introduction about myself, so I will not spend too much of time on this slide. I work for a company called Fortune as the lead architect, where we build a lot of business intelligence and analytics solutions. So the objective of today's session is for you to appreciate the need for Power BI data flows and an understanding on how to implement it. Uh, Power BI data sets is what a lot of you would be familiar with. Data flows, not so much from the experience that I've had and the conversations that I've had. So let's just get into the agenda. So we'll talk about what Power BI data flows are, a comparison of these data sets uh, against data sets, and I'll take you through a few use cases, a fundamental use case, then going further with that particular use case, then I'll show you a rather surprising use case, and finally end it with one big use case. Okay, so what are Power BI data flows and what they are, or what are they compared to Power BI data sets? Right. So now Power BI data sets is what a lot of you are probably familiar with. It's where you write Power Query on the Power BI desktop to prep the data that you pull from various sources and structure it. Okay, and then once you do that, you publish that to the Power BI service. Power BI data flows is again Power Query that you write, but this time on the Power BI service to prep the data that you get. And it is already available on the service once you build it. So when you do that, you might have this question, okay, Power Query of data sets and data flows are in the end, is Power Query running on the Power BI service? So what's the big difference? Why do you have to have two of these things? Okay. The thing is, the similarity between these two ends just there. There's a lot of differences between the two, and the intention of each of these are different. Let's take an example. Or let's take a look at how you build your data sets usually. Okay, so you use Power BI Desktop, where you connect to one or more sources, and you bring the data in. You write Power Query to structure that data into a form, and then finally you will put it into in a lot of cases, you put it into a star schema, which is the standard and also the preferred way of building your data sets. And then you usually apply a layer of DAX on top of it also to make it apply the business semantics, and you have a data set, and then you publish that to the Power BI service, which is the yellow space here on the screen, and then you start building reports on top of that. Okay, so you can build the report while you're creating it, while you're creating a data set, or you can, once you publish it to the service, you can create more reports on top of that. Now that's the usual that you would do with Power BI data sets. So in a nutshell, using Power BI Desktop, you create data sets, you publish it, and then you build reports on top of that. Okay. So data sets are intended for analytics. So they are a set of tables that you put together, you relate them, and it is intended for analytics. Right. So this is an example here. So you have an ERP database, you have sales targets coming from an Excel file. You put them together into a sales data set, and then you can create reports such as sales analysis, market analysis, and everything related to sales. Okay, so the idea of having a data set built in a star schema form is so that you can do different types of analysis, different types of reports on that one data set. Okay, so that's the standard that we use. And then when you expand this, you can have not just one data set servicing one particular use case, but you can have multiple data sets that you derive from the same source you use different tables for different requirements, and you can have something like what you see on your screen, different data sets powering different reports. Okay, so the thing is, the problems happen is now, just think about or imagine you would probably have calendar and product on two of these data sets. You probably have calendar on all three of them. Customer might be there in two of these data sets. So when you think about pulling the data from the different sources and creating your product or calendar or your customer data set within each of these data sets, you are doing a lot of repetitive work. For example, product, you would pull the data, do the data prep, join multiple tables, and when you come up with your final product table, you would have to do the same thing again and again on the customer, maybe on the finance data sets. Right? So one thing that you would use is copy paste the code, or you might have the code stored somewhere so that you can reuse it, or you would probably create a Power BI template and keep the Power Query source code inside that one. The thing is not an efficient way of doing it, because you probably would just imagine if you have new attributes coming up on the source systems, you'll have to incorporate that in all three data sets. So even though you keep a copy of your Power Query somewhere, you have to go and make the changes on all three of those data sets manually. And then the other issue is that when you create a lot of data sets on top of certain data sources, and if there's a huge volume of data, that can cause a strain on the source systems, especially when you start refreshing the data quite often. Okay, so this brings us to the first problem, to what data flows is trying to solve. Right. So what data flows is doing is it puts in a new layer in between the source and the data set. Okay, so a data flows is a Power Query piece of code that you run on the Power BI service. You create it on the Power BI service by using an internet browser. So you go to your workspace, you create a data flow, you write the Power Query to pull the data from the source systems. But this time you're not creating a data set. But what you are creating here inside the data flow is an entity or multiple entities. Now these entities are supposed to map to business entities. For example, if you have customer or if you have product as actual business entities, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to bring all of the information related to that particular entity, do all the data preparation and cleanse that data and have one single master record per product, for example. So you'll have a product entity which has organization-wide information put up in the form of a master record. Okay, so you will do that for all of the different entities that you have identified which make sense to your business. So there is nothing analytical here. You're just cleansing the data and bringing in entities so that they can be used for analytics or for different types of analytics, plus to be used by other applications as well. Okay, so what you're seeing right here is the first set is where you create your data flows, and then you use the data flows inside a data set by using Power BI Desktop and then publishing it. Okay, so once again, entities are intended to map business data or business entities, and entities are created inside a data flows. So if I look at it as an example, you have ERP and sales targets. You can bring in all of the information over here and create various entities such as product and calendar, and you will have everything that you need for product inside product. Whereas in a data set, you will only need you will have only what is required for that particular analysis. But inside the entities, you will have everything that is related to a product, and then use that as the source for all of your data sets. Right, so when you expand this further, you can have more and more entities, and you can now source different types of data sets, and that is what the main intention of data flows are. Okay, even though data sets and data flows both are actual behind the scenes are Power Queries, the intention is different, and they're created in different ways and used differently. So we can go further with entities using the common data model. So the common data model is a well-defined structure of business data. It came into play a couple of years ago where Microsoft initiated the common data model initiative with SAP and Adobe. And the whole bunch of Dynamics 365 entities got put into this one. So it's a standard business layer where you have thousands of entities that have been well defined. Okay, so what the purpose of this is so that you can have one common model across your organization that you can use to build analytics and also other applications on top of. So the Dataverse that you see in the Power Platform is built on top of this common data model. Okay, so now what we can do here with Dataflows is that you can go an extra step from what I just showed you, where you create your entities and you can map these entities or your business entities to the common data model, so that you have structured entities that map to a standard model, which can later be reused very easily. Okay. So that's the second use case of where you can extend the use case, you extend data flows or the entities inside your data flows. The next use case, you can also build your own data warehouse with data flows. Sounds surprising, but yes, you can. Okay, now this is a pattern that you use to create or to use the data flows concept to build your data warehouse inside Power BI itself. So what you're doing here is that you are pulling in data from multiple sources as is. So earlier, what you did with data flows was when you were creating entities, you were doing a lot of transformations and data prep. But here, you are bringing all the tables from the data source, from the data sources as is. There's a question from Geeta. Is there a storage limit to data sets in Power BI? Data sets, yes, there is a limit of 1 GB in Pro, but you can have large data sets if you go for Power BI Premium. Okay, so next, so continuing, so what you do here is you create a data flow. You can name it stage. So this is going to be the staging data flows where you bring in all the tables as is. Of course, the entities in Power BI terminology, but you bring all of the tables as is, same name, same structure, nothing done on top of it. And then you'll create another data flows which will represent the data warehouse. So here what you do is you use the tables that you brought into stage and you create your dimensions and your fact tables. Again, using entities, but here what you're trying to do is you're trying to structure them and formulate them to look like tables in a star schema or in a data warehouse. Of course, you can't have physical relationships between the dimensions and the fact tables like in a real data warehouse, but that doesn't matter as long as you write the queries and structure these in such a way that there is at least a logical star schema relationship among these, you're good. Because even in the real world, when you create real data warehouses, there are a lot of cases where they don't use physical relationships between the fact and dimension tables because of performance considerations. So it's fine that you don't have a physical relationship amongst the tables here in data flows, because the concept of relating entities or the tables inside data flows is not there in Power BI, unlike what you have in data sets. So now once you create your data warehouse on the Power BI service, now what you can do is you can create multiple different data sets on top of them. Right? So the rightmost column are the data sets and the reports. So the data sets are going to be the semantic data models, which you create again using the star schema structure like I showed earlier. But here what you'll be doing is you'll be using only the tables and the columns that come from the star schema, only the ones that you want for a particular business case, such as sales performance. Then you just choose a particular star schema and bring in only the data that you want. Similar with financial performance, or if you want to create management KPIs which will power a management dashboard, you can bring in data from multiple star schemas from a data warehouse, just like you would use a normal data warehouse. Okay, so there is this option for creating a data warehouse completely within your Power BI service. Okay. Now, but there are some caveats here that you need to be careful about. Um, when and why you would use data warehouses with Dataflows is when you want to create a small scale data warehouse or a data mart, or if you want to do it, want to have a quick proof of concept to show the value of Power BI. Or you can, there are lots of organizations who are low on budget when it comes to IT and technology, and where you have organizations where they are limited in in-depth technical skills to build a real data warehouse. That will be a good case for this. But all in all, it is not recommended if you want to go for a full-scale data warehouse to use Power BI, but these are some of the reasons why you would choose Power BI Dataflows to create a data warehouse. Okay, so it is not a replacement for data warehouses. Scalability is very much limited on data flows compared to the real data warehouse technologies that we have out there. Because, see, large-scale data warehouses have millions and millions of rows. You have large data volumes in GBs and going up to TBs. Data flows is not suited for that. And sometimes the ETLs can get quite complex when you're doing it based on the business logic. So in those kind of situations, data flows may not be the right option. Okay, so there is a question, what about the performance of the Power BI report when large data is loaded into in-house data set? Okay, I'll just get back to the question a little later. I would like to clarify, Nikita, if you could specify what you mean by in-house data set while I continue. Okay, so these are some of the best practices to build a data warehouse using Power BI data flows. This is from Microsoft itself. I will just copy these things onto the chat window so that if you are ever thinking of creating data warehouses using data flows, this would be an ideal place to start. Okay, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to do something that can get quite large and quite large with a set of technology which is somewhat limited. Okay, so there are some certain guidance that you need to follow. Okay, then finally, you can use Power BI data flows to assist with large-scale analytics. Now, if you look at this here on the left-hand side, if you forget the light blue part of it, you have the an example of a data flows which I showed earlier. A data flow is called organizational entities, which has multiple entities. But behind the scenes, what happens is that these data flows store their data, and in the end, in an Azure Data Lake Gen 2 behind the scenes. Right? It's just that you cannot see it. Okay, this data lake is managed by Microsoft, so you don't get to see what's behind the scenes. The end result would be the data flows for you. But if you do have your own Azure Data Lake Gen 2, you can link that with Power BI data flows. And what happens after that is that you have your own data lake connected to your data flows and not a managed one, which means if you go to Azure and take a look at your data lake, you can see all your data there. So this opens up possibilities for something much bigger, where you can have things like Azure Synapse Analytics connecting to this cleansed and prepped data on your data lake for further and complex and larger analytics needs. Okay, so things like big data analytics, cloud data warehousing, and machine learning can be enabled with this. So think of a scenario where you have citizen developers building these organizational entities, right, from different sources and then putting it on your own data lake. You can have other flows outside of Power BI which bring in data from through Data Factory probably and put it in the same data lake. So now you have data brought in through two different avenues, but you can still bring them all into Synapse Analytics. You can put Synapse Analytics on top of this data lake and you can make use of all of this. So this is another use case where you can extend the use of Power BI data flows for your large scale analytics needs. Right, so these are what I have, the 4 use cases that are quite widely used and interesting to use. Let me go back to the question Geeta put up. What about the performance of the Power BI report when large-scale data is loaded into in-house data set? Geeta, would you mind telling me what you mean by in-house data set?
So basically, when large data is being loaded into Power BI report, right? How does it work? Will the performance be affected? How would it be? That's what I was
Okay,
interested to know.
great. So in any case, when you bring a lot of data into a data set, and when it goes on the report, when you have large amounts of data that you're trying to show on a report, it's always going to have an impact on performance. So that is why it's always wise to create your reports, your Power BI reports, in a summarized and aggregated manner, and then bring down to only to the levels that you need. But in certain cases, when you need to go to very detailed level data, then of course you need to use something like composite model, where you have the detailed data stored on a actual data warehouse or a database, and you can have a hybrid model of having the aggregates on Power BI and the detailed data outside of Power BI. So that's one way of doing that.
All right, that helps.
Okay, so getting back to data flows, once again, to reiterate, data flows does not come into the data set. Data sets will be using the data flows. So we use data flows so that we can have an additional set of layers before your data set, so that you can have data structured probably one time, so that you don't have to have lots of different data sets doing the same thing over and over again. We also looked at data warehousing concept that can be done using data flows, especially when you don't have in-depth technical knowledge, because it's almost no code. And if you have only citizen developers and citizen data analysts on your team. Okay. Now, since I have about 7 minutes left, let me just go in and show you a little demo of how data flows can be used. Okay, so please bring in my Power BI workspace. So I have a workspace for GPPB. Okay, I already have some data flows created here. So now usually you would also find data sets and reports here. In my this particular one doesn't have any of those. Let me just start off by creating a new data flow here. I will click on add new entities. So remember, a data flow has one or more entities within them. I am going to connect to my SQL database, my on-premise SQL database. So I will connect to the database, which is an AdventureWorks database that I have. And I try to bring, click on next. I have connected to this database using a gateway. You need to have a gateway to connect to on-premise systems. Just like password. Password and put it here. So I have already set up a gateway to this SQL database. And now it connects, and let me just scroll down and select just one table that I want, the product table from the production schema. Click on transform. It is very similar to what you would see in Power BI desktop, but in Power BI desktop we use Power Query to create data sets, which is for analytical purposes. Here we are going to do some data preparation work, so you can get some entities. Okay, so here first thing is I will name the entity as product, and I will just choose only just a few columns to show you the example. But if I scroll right to the right hand side, you can see that there are so many other columns here which says table inside. This is because Power BI has SQL Server has the table has lots of other tables connected to it through relationships. So it shows those tables that are related through this view. Okay, so I'll just come back. I will click on choose columns to choose only the columns that I want. So I choose product ID, name, maybe the color. I'll choose the list price, and then I'll come down, and I have this thing called production.product subcategory. This is the actual table that product is connected to, not just a column. Okay, so I'm selecting that because I want to get the product subcategory also into this. So it's like doing a join. Okay, but the join is already done for us because it is connected to connected in the SQL database. I'll expand this here, and this will give me more. I will choose the name of the subcategory, and then I'll go to the product category column, which is actually another table embedded inside there. I'll choose that one as well. So now that one expands into subcategory name. A lot of them are null, but you do have some values. I'll expand product category and choose only the product category name. So now what I have here is a table with data from 3 tables actually. So I have product, I'll just call this subcategory, and I'll call this one category. I have 3 of these columns which have a lot of null values in them. So what I will do is right click, replace all the null values with a value called unknown, so that there is some value there for those null values. And I have a table here. Now this table of 6 columns is actually data from 3 different tables put together. So this is data preparation that I've done, a quick and easy data preparation that I've done on Power BI Dataflows. And now I'll click and save and close this one. And let me call this organizational entities. That's the name of my workflow, sorry, my data flow. Again, I click on refresh now, where it will pull the data from the entire set of data for this product entity from my SQL database. Okay. You can also set up incremental refresh if you have Power BI Premium. So once I close it, so here I have organizational entities, which is the work data flow that I created, and within this data flow, I have the product entity. And then what I can do now is this is going to be the source for all of my data sets that I create. So I can use Power BI desktop to connect to this data set every time I want to use product information. I don't have to go to my database anymore. I can just use this entity over and over again for all of my different data sets that I want to create. Okay, so I got a couple more minutes to go. I will show you this while I am taking any questions. So if you have any more questions, yeah, please drop it in the chat. I will answer them while the next session is going. I will connect to Power BI data sets. Okay, if the demo does not finish in time, I'll just cut off. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to connect to I have problem with my connection. It's taking a while for it to come up. Okay, let me go to get data, Power BI data flows. I'm trying to connect to the Power BI data flow that I already had, which I just created. And here you see my workspace, and I have organizational entities and product. So here in my Power BI desktop, I am linking to the data flows that I created. So my data flow is going to be my source for product. So similarly, I can create more and more entities on my Power BI service so that I don't have to hit the database all the time. So here I have it inside my Power BI desktop. I can do my extra preparation if I want to. I bring in more data and create my data set inside here. Okay, so that's it from me. If you have any questions, now's the time.
Yeah, I do not see any questions, Gogula, until now, but I think others can drop in their questions into the chat window. Yeah, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Was too good. Maybe we would want to have a detailed session some other time in our local meetup as well. Thank you so much for so much of information in a short time. It was a
Absolutely.
good articulation. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you for having me.
Now we have Ram Prasad, one of a local community lead, a very friendly chap, active person in the community. He's going to talk about responsive design for Canvas apps. And here's your stage, Ram.
Yeah, hi Geeta. Geeta, can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little feeble.
Is it okay now?